So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Huân Dũng, and today I'll discuss in detail about the grammar part of Unit 5. So first, we'll discuss about cleft sentences. So what exactly is a cleft sentence? So a cleft sentence is a complex sentence. Now, in case you're wondering what is a complex sentence, well, a simple sentence will sound like I'm a boy or I love ice cream, and a complex sentence will sound more complicated. Well, this is the structure of a cleft sentence. It plus be plus noun or pronoun plus a defined relative clause. For example, it was Tom who helped us. It was Anne that I saw. So when the object is a proper noun, that is more usual than who. With all other objects, that is the correct form. For example, it is the manager that we want to see. It was wine that we ordered. That is usual for non-personal subjects. It's speed that causes accident, not bad roads. So we can replace a relative clause by infinitives, which is a to-verb. For example, if the original sentence sounds like Ethan is usually the last person who understands the joke. Now if we replace the relative pronoun who understand with a infinitive, it will sound like Ethan is usually the last person to understand the joke. We can also replace a relative clause with a present participle. For example, the students studying the hardest have the best results. Now we'll dive deeper into infinitives. So we can use an infinitive when after ordinal numbers the last only superlatives. For example, the last man to leave the ship equals the last man who left or leaves the ship. It's also worth noting that the infinitive replaces a subject pronoun plus a verb, not an object pronoun plus a verb. For example, the first man that we saw has a distinct meaning compared to the first man to see. We can also use an infinitive when there is an idea of purpose or permission. For example, they need a garden to play in. It's also noteworthy that the infinitive replaces a verb plus a relative pronoun as an object. For example, the first man to see is Tom equals the first man we must see is Tom equals the first man who saw me was Tom. Now we'll discuss in detail about present participles. So we can use a present participle when the verb is a continuous tense. For example, people who are waiting for the bus often shelter in my doorway equals people waiting for the bus often shelter in my doorway. We can also use a present participle when the verb expresses a habitual action. For example, boys who attend or attended the school must wear uniforms has the same meaning as boys attending the school must wear uniforms. We can also use a present participle when the verb in the clause expresses a wish, desire, want, hope, but not like. For example, people who wish to go on a tour has the same meaning as people wishing to go on a tour. Now, our friend has discussed this part in the part about relative clause, so I'll go through this part really quick. So, if the noun in the sentence is about things, and that noun is the subject of a sentence, we can use the relative pronoun which. For example, the block which cost £5 million to build has been empty for years. Now, if that noun is a possessive, we can use whose or of which. For example, his house, whose windows were all broken, was a depressing sight. Now, if that noun is an object, we can use which. For example, she gave me this jumper, which she had knitted herself. Now, it's noteworthy that if we want to make a sentence sound more formal, we can change the order of the preposition. By placing it right before a relative pronoun will make it sound more formal. For example, if I have a sentence, Ashdown Forest, which we'll be driving through, isn't a forest anymore. Now, if we want to make it sound more formal, we'll change the order of the preposition through by placing it right before the word which will make it sound more formal. For example, Ashdown Forest, through which we'll be driving, isn't a forest any longer. So we cannot change the order of a phrasal verb in the sentence to make it sound more formal, because that's against grammar. For example, the efficiency, which we have to put up with for so long, is beginning to annoy our customers. Now, if the noun in a sentence is about persons and that noun is a subject of a sentence, we can use the word who. For example, my neighbor, who is very pessimistic, says there will be no apples this year. If that noun is a possessive, we can use the word whose. For example, Anne, whose children are at school all day, is trying to get a job. Now, if that noun is an object, the relative pronoun cannot be omitted. So, considering who or whom. Now, right before an object, we cannot use who. Instead, we must use whom. For example, Peter, whom everyone suspected, turned out to be innocent. Now, we can place a preposition right before whom. For example, Mr. Johns, for whom I was working, was very generous about overtime. We can also apply all, both, few, most, several, some, etc. plus of, plus whom or of, or which. For example, her sons, both of whom work abroad, bring her up every week. The buses, most of which were already full, were surrounded by an angry crowd. So now I'll discuss more about connective relative clause. So if I have a sentence, I told Peter, who said it wasn't his business. The clause, who said it wasn't his business, is a connective relative clause. I just want to remind you guys that a connective relative clause doesn't clarify or add any more meanings to the preceding noun. It just continued the story. So this can also be replaced by and but plus a clause. For example, I told Peter, but he said it wasn't his business. Which can stand for a whole clause. For example, the rain rattled on the roof all night, which kept us awake. There are other relative pronouns other than who, whom, which, or that. There are whoever, whichever, whatever, etc. For example, whoever gains the most points wins the competition. In a very formal style, a subject's relative pronoun is sometimes dropped after there is. For example, there's a man at the door who wants to talk to you. In older English, who sometimes means whoever. that which used to be used in the same way as what. For example, who steals my purse steals trash. In modern English, people will say, whoever steals my purse steals trash. Or, we have that which we need, and in modern English, people will say we have what we need. So the grammar part of Unit 5 is practically over. I highly recommend you guys to take a look at our gap filling exercises in order to fully understand all the points that we have mentioned and so as to do well in future exams.